In ages past, the world was sang into being, and we get to talk about why. We're finally here. We're doing this thing. Welcome to the Lord of the Rings series. I am Chad Garrett. I am so excited to do this thing. Let's get into it. Okay, so The Lord of the Rings, written by J.R.R. Tolkien, has been acclaimed by many as being one of the greatest fantasy series of all time. And the reason why isn't actually because of Tolkien's writing style. It has more to do with the world that he built. There's like 69,000 plus years worth of history that goes into Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Now, the entire Lord of the Rings saga takes place over the course of like 9 years, from the time that Frodo leaves the Shire to whenever he shows up in Mordor and destroys the ring. And then it's like a 9-year journey back or a 6-year journey back or something like that. And we're going to get into that. But today, in order to understand how the world of Middle-earth came to be and who the characters are and why they matter in the true depth of what Tolkien was revealing, we have to talk about the founding of the world. Now, the mythos that Tolkien writes in is known as the Legendarium. And the Legendarium is specifically written as this set of discovered histories that Tolkien is writing about. He's not actually writing, he's pretending that he's deciphering these from old languages, because that's what Tolkien was a professor of. He was a professor of language at Oxford University, and this is where he was a part of the Inklings, and he was befriended by C.S. Lewis, and actually helped C.S. Lewis come back to Christianity, and which is huge. If you know anything about C.S. Lewis, if you've looked at my episodes on the Screw Tape letters that we have, Lewis is super influential, and eventually we're going to get into the Chronicles of Narnia, which I actually have sitting back there. But I want to talk about how Tolkien and Lewis used to argue. And the reason why Tolkien and Lewis used to argue, and this is why I bring up the Chronicles of Narnia, is because Lewis was a fan of allegory. Anyone that's ever read the Chronicles of Narnia knows that there is tons of allegory. Everything is a symbol, okay? Everything is a symbol. So for those that aren't up on like the dictionary, allegory is like representing abstract ideas with characters and events, okay? Super simple. Tolkien doesn't like this. Lewis is all about it. They have gripes and arguments all the time because Tolkien thinks that Lewis is being too forefront about the motivations, whereas Lewis thinks that Tolkien is way too obscure and Tolkien's being obscure on purpose. The way that Tolkien gets around the allegory idea, not that there is no allegory in Tolkien's world, there absolutely is, and we're going to talk about that, but the way that he gets around this idea is writing these things as though they are rediscovered history before the time of Abram, that we know as Abraham. So let's get into what that looks like. The world that Middle-earth is located on is a planet called Arda, and Arda was sang into being by the Valar, and the Valar were these high primordial beings, angels essentially, in service of the great god Eru-Ilúvatar. Eru, Ilúvatar. And the reason why Ilúvatar wants Arda created is because he wants to create a place for men and elves. That's it. It's the whole reason. He wants to create a place. At the time, they were known as the children of Ilúvatar. So when he commissions the Ainur, A-I-N-U-R, because as I've said before on Story Dose, Tolkien doesn't know how to give things regular names. When he commissions the Ainur, which are like the head of all of the Valar, so the Valar are this race of primordial beings, essentially angels, think archangels here. When he commissions them to create Arda, he does it so that he can have a place to put the children of Ilúvatar, the elves and the men. It is not long after the creation, the first singing of Arda into being, that the eldest angel, the eldest of the Valar, and the most powerful of them all, known as Melkor, decides that he hates the children of Ilúvatar, and his way at rebelling and getting back at them is by singing discord and darkness into the world. His entire purpose, the thing that he contributes to the foundation of Arda, is darkness, discord, and evil. This was his great rebellion. And so he was cast out for it. And in doing so, Arda was originally had to be lit by these lamps. Now I was like, how does that work if it's like this sphere shape? Well, at the time, Arda was flat. This is important for later. Melkor destroys these lamps. And so the Valar go to the continent known as Aman. Now, it is on Aman that the Valar, they plant these great trees. Both of them give light. One of them provides silver light, and the other one provides golden light. So you can sort of see where this is going. The tree of golden light eventually becomes the sun because it only ever creates one fruit. And when this tree is destroyed, once again, by Melkor and this other primordial being that mainly takes the shape of a spider. Anybody ever watch the movies? The giant spider Shelob and Shelob's lair in The Return of the King? Her great ancestor was this primordial being known as Ungoliant. And Ungoliant bites one of the trees and poisons it, and Melkor straight up just beats down the other tree. And in doing so, they rob the light from Aman. They also go and steal the Silmarillion jewels. There are 3 jewels of pure light that are created by and kept by this character named Feanor. Melkor, after destroying the trees, uses the chaos to steal the Silmarillion jewels, and then he flees to Middle-earth. And this is the first time that we really see Middle-earth come into all of this stuff. The way that you get light after these great trees are destroyed, and understand the world is still flat at this point, is that the Valar create 2 vessels, one to hold the fruit of the golden tree, and that becomes the sun. And they choose one of the great Maiar, so like a lesser helping hand to the Valar. They choose one of these Maiar to take this thing up and guide it into the sky where they have it begin to rise in the east and set in the west. And then after that, you take the flower of the silver tree, you encapsulate it in its vessel, you select another one of the Maiar. We'll get to the Maiar here in just a moment. You select another one of these lesser version of the Valar, and you have them guide this giant sphere up into the sky, and it goes from east to west. Now, fun fact, the moon went first, which is why the elves in the story prefer the light of the silver moon. Also why the dwarves prefer the light of the silver moon. Men, hobbits, the more mortal races, decide that the sun is more important to them, and so they worship the sun more often. Let's take a breather for a second, because I've been going really, really fast. Arda, Iluvatar. Iluvatar has Arda sung into existence so that he has a place to put men and elves. Bad Valar, bad singer, decides he wants to sing discord and darkness into the world. Destroys the lamps, he destroys the trees, and in the process of destroying the trees, steals the 3 jewels of pure light. He then flees to Middle-earth, to an area of Middle-earth that it actually no longer exists because it sank into the sea. And as Melkor is sitting on his throne, Feanor, the creator of the jewels, renames him Morgoth. Morgoth now becomes the first true Dark Lord. He rules over the land known as Middle-earth, and he has these 3 Silmarillion jewels inlaid into his crown. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we start with the first age of Middle-earth. Okay, so picking back up with the first age of Middle-earth, Morgoth is ruling over Middle-earth that up until this point has resided purely in darkness because almost everything has taken place over on the continent of Aman. And then you have this race of primordials known as the Valar that sang the world into existence. They needed some helpers according to Iluvatar, and so Iluvatar creates this group called the Maiar. A single of the Maiar would be a Maya. Once again, weird names, thanks Tolkien. They are a race of lesser primordials. As I mentioned before, the beginning of the first age happens when Melkor flees and light from the trees is now brought to Middle-earth, as well as pretty much the rest of the world, by the sun and the moon being lifted into the sky by these Maiar. There are two really important Maiar that end up becoming big, big, bad, bad, big, bad, bad, big, bad. Okay? The first one is Sauron, and the second one is Saruman. Enter Sauron. Who the crap is Sauron? If Morgoth was the original Dark Lord and Sauron is just this sort of like imitation Dark Lord, who the crap is he actually? His original name was Mairon, Mairon, and it means admirable. He was created pure and good and uncorrupted. His main loves, the things that he valued most over anything, were order and perfection, and the thing that he detested the most was anything that was wasteful. So you already see the setup for what is about to happen, where Morgoth was just pure evil for the sake of evil. He was darkness for the sake of darkness. He was the embodiment of our first sin, right? If there is an allegory to be made here, which Tolkien would shoot me for, it is that Morgoth is the progenitor. He is the allegory to the first sin, to the evilness in the hearts of man. Sauron is more akin to who we become when we allow our vices to get out of hand, or when we allow our virtues to go too far, when the ends justify the means. And this is shown because Sauron becomes this character where he was never in the game to be subjugated. He never served Morgoth with the intention of remaining a servant. He always served with the intention to command. It's one of the things that made him so cunning. It's one of the things that Morgoth allowed him to be put to such good use for, because Sauron was also known as a spy. He was the Lord Shapeshifter. He was the Vampire King. He was the king of all werewolves. Yes, all of those things are in Tolkien's world as well that you just never hear about. His ultimate goal, by striving for these order and this perfection and this removal of all waste, wasn't actually the destruction of Arda or even Middle-earth. In fact, the reason why Mairon became Sauron, is because Sauron wanted to subjugate everyone. He wanted to dominate the minds and wills of the free peoples, right, as Tolkien calls them, of the free peoples of Middle-earth. But Sauron served Morgoth until the end of what is known as the War of Wrath. The book that Tolkien's son Christopher Tolkien edited and wrote, called The Silmarillion, is all about the War of Wrath. It's about the Silmarillion jewels and how they came to be, what happened to them, the stories that revolved around the War of Wrath. And the War of Wrath is what led to the demise, the banishment of Morgoth into what is known in the Legendarium as the Void. When Morgoth is defeated, he is banished into the Void by a concentrated effort of all of the remaining Valar. Many of them had died in this war. Many of them have been subjugated and brought to heel by Morgoth. And this is wild because not only did Morgoth have like Balrogs, like you saw Gandalf go toe-to-toe with, and this explains with the Balrog being a Maiar and Gandalf also being one of the Maiar, as we see with Saruman and everything. Gandalf is also one of the Maiar. It explains how this old man is able to go toe-to-toe with this giant flaming demon guy. That's why that makes sense. It's not just that Gandalf is a wizard and he does really cool wizard things. It's because Gandalf is actually a part of a primordial race that is of the same race as the Balrog. It's just that the Balrog has been corrupted. That's it. Darkness and fire have consumed the once benevolent Maiar that the Balrog was, and Gandalf had more or less maintained his sanity. Now, in the fight of the War of Wrath, the fight ends with Morgoth unleashing his secret weapon, which were the dragons. And this is where we get the legendary dragon known as Ensalagon the Black. He's ginormous. He is huge. And Gandalf mentions him in the first Lord of the Rings book, in the first book of the Fellowship of the Ring, when he says that even the fire of the great Ansalagon the Black could not harm the Ring of Power, to show you how powerful Sauron actually was in being able to forge the One Ring. The end of the First Age coincides directly with the War of Wrath. This is important because this kicks off the Second Age. Sauron, because of his allegiance to Morgoth during the War of Wrath, gets banished and exiled, and he goes to Mordor and starts building his Tower of Barad-dûr, right? So you have the Tower of Isengard, and in the two towers, to put this into context with you, you have the Tower of Isengard, which is where Saruman lives at, but we never really learn the name of the tower that Sauron is in the movies. We do in the books. The tower is called the Barad-dûr. I don't know what it means. I don't have it written down in my notes. Just know that that's what that is. Moving quickly. After the War of Wrath, some of the Valar take the Silmarillion jewels and they return essentially into heaven with them. The world is still flat at this point. Sauron uses trickery to convince the elves to make the Rings of Power. In doing so, there's also the rise of another kingdom called Numenor. And Numenor is the direct descendants of the original creator of the Silmarillion jewels, Feanor. Now, this is important because Gondor is the direct descendant of Elendil, who is the last surviving king or nobility from Numenor when Numenor falls. The reason why Numenor falls is because of Sauron in the Second Age. So Sauron is building up power in Middle-earth, and he's launching wars against the free peoples of Middle-earth. All the elves are mad, all the men are mad, all the dwarves are mad. Numenor doesn't care. Numenor is the island city. Once again, if there is anything that can be called allegory, and don't smite me down, Tolkien, if you have been given that power in heaven, if there is any allegory to be made here, it is that Atlantis, or any analogy, it is that Numenor is essentially Atlantis. And we know this because it matches up with the doom of Atlantis in old history. This is Tolkien's way of trying to tie things back and make it seem like it is our own history. The reason why Numenor gets sunk beneath the sea is because they became so powerful as a race and so powerful as a people that Sauron convinced them that they could go and launch an attack on the far west, where the elves are all sailing to in the books, and attack the place where the Valar are living, essentially the physical place of heaven. This is the one time in the 60-some-odd thousand years of Tolkien's history that the great god Ilúvatar intercedes on behalf of his angels and says no. And he immediately crushes Numenor beneath the sea. And in doing so, the destruction of Numenor is so intense, it is so powerful, it is so world-wracking, that the destruction of Numenor in the Second Age is what turns the world into a sphere. The world is no longer flat because of the doom of Numenor. This explains, in Tolkien's words, why you can't find Atlantis, is because Atlantis was in the sea before the world was rounded, and its destruction is now in the sea beyond, to where only the elven ships can reach. You can't reach this place anymore because of the rounded world. The men that were in Middle-earth, that were leading the old kingdoms, fell quickly to the power of the rings. The dwarves more or less resisted the power of the rings, but their greed was amplified because of them. And the elven lords were able to recognize Sauron's treachery before the rings were able to corrupt them. This is the origin of the ring wraiths. After Numenor's fall, Sauron thinks that he has gotten away scot-free. His conquest of Middle-earth is assured, except when he returns to Mordor, he realizes that one of the ancestors of Numenor has been founding this new kingdom on his very border. Right outside of Mordor, there is Gondor, and it's founded by the king Elendil, who Isildur is his son. And Isildur is the one that slices the ring off of Sauron's hand. And he does that after Gil-galad, the elven king, that was essentially Elrond's mentor, I would say. He's the last great elven king. Gil-galad and Elendil, two extremely powerful people, fight Sauron on his own plains after a 7-year siege, 9-year siege on the fortress of Barad-dûr. This is when you get that scene in the movies where Elendil is struck down, Isildur picks up his father's sword and slices the finger off. Well, that's because Sauron is so weak. He's weak from a ton of imprisonment out in Numenor before the fall of Numenor. And then he was weakened by the Númenóreans themselves, and he returns, but he thinks that he has enough power to try and take over everyone. And the elves and the men are like, nope, actually, we think we got you beat. 9-year siege happens, and then the ring is cut. But then Isildur makes the grave mistake. He can't throw the ring into the fire. Elrond can't convince him to throw the ring into the fire. This is what brings us to the Third Age. The end of that war, the end of the first War of the Ring, is what brings us to the Third Age. Now, there's still 1,000-ish years from this point to where we pick up in the Lord of the Rings series. But on the next episode, we're going to be skipping all of that. We're touching on it briefly. And we're going to be jumping into The Hobbit. So, don't miss the next episode. I hope you all have really enjoyed this. I enjoy talking about this. This is such a really cool story. This sets up things that matter, okay? I want you all to know that we're not just talking about these things to geek out on the Lord of the Rings. We're talking about all of these things because they matter. And a lot of the things that matter happen in the text of the novels. So I don't want to spend this episode diving into all the wisdom that Tolkien gives us. More, I wanted to lay the groundwork and give you the history of Middle-earth, of Arda, of Tolkien's world, and to show how much thought he put into everything that he just barely grazes the surface on in The Lord of the Rings. That said, The Lord of the Rings is dense. We have 6 books in The Lord of the Rings. There are 2 books per volume. Each volume you know the names of: The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and Return of the King. We're going to do 1 episode per book, including The Hobbit. So this was episode 1. We got 7 more coming down the pipe with all sorts of cool things. We even get into Beowulf on some of these episodes. So you don't want to miss that. Until next time, I'm Chad Garrett, and this is The Chad Garrett Show.